The most important questions rarely have simple answers. They demand different perspectives. They challenge assumptions. They require us to think beyond the boundaries of our own experience. I'm Mimi Brooks, and welcome to Bold Agendas. Each episode brings together leaders from business, technology, academia, public policy, and beyond to explore one of the defining questions of our time. How do we harness the power of emerging technologies while remaining responsible stewards of our organizations, our communities, and the generations that follow us? Together, we'll examine the opportunities, the risks, and the choices ahead, not to predict the future, but to better understand our responsibility in shaping it. Today, we're asking a deceptively simple question. As machines become more intelligent, what kind of leader does the future require? My guest believes the answer isn't found in the latest technology. It's found rather in timeless human wisdom. Surinder Lall is a global technology executive, leadership advisor, and author whose work spans artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, digital transformation, and executive leadership. In his new book, Leading in the Age of AI, Timeless Wisdom for a Machine-Driven World, he argues that as AI reshapes the way organizations operate and decisions are made, the enduring virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance become more, not less, essential to effective leadership. It's a fascinating perspective that challenges many of our assumptions about what it means to lead in an age of increasingly intelligent machines. So let's explore why the oldest leadership principles may be exactly what the future demands. Surinder, welcome to Bold Agendas. I am so delighted to have you here to talk about your new book. I'm really excited to have you on the show. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Mimi. And thank you for inviting me. Always open to talking about the book, seeing it consume so much of my life.
I bet. Well, I want to just say before we get totally underway that my sign of a good book, and I read the book, is everything is dog-eared and highlighted. So,
Great.
So many good
Fantastic.
lessons to learn here. I hope we can do it justice in the hour. So let me go ahead and jump in. The thing that really struck me about the book from the get-go was there's so many good AI books out. But the thing about this one is that it's really very little about technology, right? It really is all about leadership. So, I thought that was great. And, throughout the whole discussion, it really came back to this idea of how do we help leaders navigate this new age. So if I can jump in to the beginning of the book, you referred to the whole opening piece as the awakening, which I thought was a great way to think about it. So what do you think it is that leaders need to awaken to today?
Sure. So I've had the privilege of working in the tech field now for 25 years. And I've seen a lot of change. I mean, lots of people that I've spoken to said, this is not the first time we've seen change in tech, which is absolutely true. We have seen, the emergence of cloud computing, faster internet connections, mobile devices, IoT. It's been non-stop. As you'd expect, the evolution of technology. One of the things that drew me to this space was the fact that it doesn't stop changing. It's a stimulating place to be. And I think what's really changed, I think when AI came about, certainly, look, machine learning has been around for a long time, long before it hit the mainstream and we saw ChatGPT. It goes back many decades in experimentational form. So it's been known as machine learning. It hasn't really been branded as generative AI. When it hit the public domain, people seem to think that, it just magically appeared and suddenly Gen AI as a new thing came from nowhere. People who work in the field know that it's existed in other forms, maybe not called as Gen AI, but it's machine learning and advanced machine learning and deep learning and technologies have been around for a while. So what really struck me about this moment, and the reason I opened the book with the awakening, is I think this technology is more impactful on us as human beings than any technology before it. And I say that because it attacks the very core of what it is to be a human being. When you ask people, the two most powerful words in the English language, arguably, are, they begin with I am, and everything that comes after I am is how you define yourself as a person, right? So it could be your name, could be your job. Most often when you speak to people, certainly in a professional setting, they'll say, my name is Joe and I am head of something or other, right? They define themselves as knowledge workers as their role. Now, if you have a technology which effectively is designed to replicate your knowledge in a matter of small prompts, that poses an existential crisis for knowledge workers. Who are we now? If you take away our knowledge, then who are we? We're just Joe. The very thing that we've spent 20 plus years defining ourselves with, that my expertise is X, has now been impacted in a way that it's never been before. This technology attacks the very core of what it is to be a knowledge worker. And as a result, it has the most profound impact on human beings. Now, look, there's lots of arguments about human replacements and, will it take our jobs and these sort of things. I think more so than anything else, the impact for leaders is how do you navigate a period of change where you will effectively end up in a situation to replace human beings with technology and effectively automate their jobs away. We're used to having lots of, people lose their jobs and replace them with other human beings, but not with technology. And we could be the last generation of leaders who have just human beings in the room. We could be running major farms of orchestration using agents to do a good chunk of this work. And you're beginning to see that. You're beginning to see organizations adopting these technologies at a rapid pace. You only have to look back a few weeks where Microsoft, Meta, and Oracle have all laid off people, and they've cited, AI as being a major driver and automation as being a major driver. Was it solely the reason? Maybe not. There is definitely some evidence of companies using the AI excuse to, fulfill agendas they've probably had for cost cutting at some point. But the reality is, is undeniable. You're beginning to see this pattern manifesting across the entire North Star of the tech organizations. Companies look to Microsoft and Oracle and the giants of Silicon Valley to kind of give them a sense of where technology should be going. And if their response to the technology change is lay off people, that becomes the North Star for corporations. And that's a dangerous place for us to be.
Well, and as you said, we're already starting to see, leaders running what's essentially, Surinder, hybrid organizations, synthetic actors and human workers, collaborating, coexisting anyways. And I think that maybe this is what you're saying in terms of the responsibility for leaders is changing quite quickly, as we think about, the choices that they make, right? The choices that they make that will have long tail yep. in terms of the future of human workers and whether we're helping people, to find their value proposition in this new emerging environment. And that's what I think a lot of your book seems to me is about, is how leaders find their value prop at a terribly important time. And then how individuals can think about this themselves in terms of creating new value in organizations.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't have summarized it better myself.
Yeah, I love it. No, I love it. It really sits at the epicenter of so much of the work that I do. And I really love that you start with the human condition, you stay with the human condition, and you end with it at the end of the book, from different vantage points. I thought it was very effective, Surinder. So let me ask you about, in the opening part of the book, the 4 stages of leadership. They seem progressive to me.
Sure.
And maybe you can stop for a moment and talk about that.
Yeah. So the 4 stages of leadership, you've got, you already see this in companies as far as maturity is concerned, of how you understand the organization, its objectives, the way you adopt new technologies. And it does go from a very low maturity where effectively everything's a gamble and you're
Yeah.
winging it. That's the best way to describe it. You wake up in the morning and you just wing it. And there's surprisingly, lots of organizations who are dealing with a sizable backlog already where their resourcing is. So this is an age-old problem, right? We've had a situation for many years where people have been laid off and companies have got, tighter and tighter budgets, and they're expected to do more with less. Now, AI has basically poured petrol on the fire of all this legacy stuff. So whilst it's added its own layer of complexity that you now have to manage AI systems, you've got a legacy stack which has basically been accelerated to create further problems. Now, organizations which are at the lower maturity end are really feeling that pain, and in fact, they're imploding almost because the operation has become unsustainable. There's just not enough people. There's too much work, and there is no governance, right? Now, and there isn't really a focus on human beings. Again, it all goes back to human beings. The second stage of evolution is organizations which are run a bit better. They have a bit more governance and a bit more structure and a bit more budget, but they're still far away from where they need to be. And they're not truly human-centric. They tick the boxes. So then you get the third stage of leadership evolution, which is you've now reached a point where you have an equilibrium and you have a full understanding of the human beings that work for you, your environment, your ecosystem, and you're progressive. And it doesn't come immediately. It's not an easy thing to achieve. And most companies nowadays have an appetite to stay at stage 2 in kind of semi-chaos. Now, the fourth stage, that's not something you experience too many times in your career. Is where you're now at a point of progressive, where you're forward thinking, you're ahead of the technology, you're people centric, you've created basically a parity between the technology and the people, and there's an understanding for a brighter future. Now, most companies dwell in the stage 1, stage 2 of leadership maturity, which is sadly in this period is presenting many issues. We've now got a legacy backlog of human issues, technology issues, investment issues, and you've now stuck AI on top of that. And they're all looking at each other like, what do I do with this?
Yeah. So, Surinder, can we talk about this idea for a sec? Because I think that when you talk about this as a maturity curve, if you will, and this idea of how human-centric is the organization along each one of these progressive stages, right? Surinder, one of the things that I find, I just wonder how you think about this, is that this concept of what do we mean by human centricity can be confusing to businesses. And sometimes I think, Surinder, they solve it by things like culture, or employee policy, for example, or, flexibility in terms of work practices. And I think that this concept of, how we create enduring human purpose and contribution in a dynamic and very fast changing business. How do we help people adapt, right, into these environments so that they can be personally and professionally successful? Seems to me to be what we're trying to describe when we say, human centric. But I'm not sure that everybody understands the responsibility that comes along with that. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. No, I agree. I think culture is very often misunderstood. Now, you'll get companies which will have value statements, right? So you'll say, what are we as a business? The top 3 statements will be like, customer centric, bold and courageous. There'll be a few things that are largely left open to interpretation, right? So, and I think back in the 80s and 90s, they used to have these posters on the wall, which would say, let's have a guy climbing a mountain and have a statement underneath it, be courageous, So culture, really, for it to permeate and be a useful tool for managing people and to motivate people and to make people feel they belong, it has to be lived. Now, too many companies go down the route of saying these are our 3 core values and this is what we live by. Everything should go back to those three values. But when you look at what do they do to bring those values to life, it's very little, right? Most of this period is going to be a hearts and minds exercise. The pace of change, because it's faster than anything we've seen before, if you haven't got the employees on board and they don't understand the corporate culture and they don't feel that they're part of the corporate culture and that you genuinely care about their well-being, their future, the changes the companies are making. Because what's happening is there is this insatiable and to some extent understandable desire to adopt AI, right? The commercial advantage of adopting AI technology for businesses is,
I think it's pressure.
Irresistible. It's irresistible.
And it's a lot of pressure, right? It's a lot of pressure from the board, a lot of pressure from, perceived ideas of competitive heat, et cetera.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you look at the market, you look at everyone around you, and they're all leveraging AI for commercial advantage. And I think what this period has kind of shown me is, look, we've always had this kind of symbiotic relationship between employer and employee, where we know that the company makes money, but we also know that we make money, right? So there is this understanding that you're part of this ecosystem where the company makes profits, but you also have food on the table, and you earn a living. Now, what's changed is, I think with the evolution of AI, it does feel like there is this march towards adoption at all costs, and humans being one of the prime victims of this march. And it's at a stage now where the discussions for leaders within meetings is how do we adopt this stuff? How can we reduce cost? How can we? And when you start asking questions like this is the period where leaders making sound decisions about the future of their company, the organization, the relationship with employees is so important. Because otherwise, if you don't have much of a culture embedded in the company, bar a few HR documents, and suddenly you start cutting people, and they don't understand how the company is any more human-centric or cares about their employees, you get one of two things begin to happen. You have apathy kicking in with the employees. So, well, if you don't care about me, I'm going to do the bare minimum, right? And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because they do less, and you're like, I could easily replace them, and then they get replaced. So it's a really, really bumpy time, I think, in organizational change.
Well, I think that there's so many different comments I could make to it, but let me take it from a leadership perspective and see what you think. I feel that while all this is happening, at the speed of AI, behind us, this dynamic exponential speed that I think people get quite nervous about in terms of keeping pace, almost that you'd have to literally run faster as opposed to, think differently. I think that we have to be careful about, what we do with people's energy, Surinder, because, we can make it, a nervous energy in terms of action, you got to be moving, as opposed to, having people find their bearing and grounding in this environment and having a better sense of this idea of how I contribute and participate going forward. And I feel that what's critical here is that leaders need to show the way, lead the way here, Surinder. And what I mean is, leadership itself, I think the role of leaders, changes from the leader being the person out front, the person to admire, the person that, everyone is trying to emulate. And the leader tries to create the conditions, under which the organization is going to adapt and flourish. That's a different idea, right? So it's different for me to be out front and leading and trying to get people to follow me in this. Of course, there's an element of that, but it's very different to think that, as a leader, my job is to create conditions that humans can be successful and flourish. Your thoughts?
Look, I absolutely agree. I think there's a good part of the book I talk about reminding humans why their contribution is important and what makes us different from computers, right? our ability to see the grays, the compassion, to read the room, all of these nuances of behavior that AI hasn't got to a stage that it can replicate, and hopefully doesn't do in my lifetime, certainly. Um, it's there is a period from leading from the front, but I think and normally this is what so everyone has a different leadership style. Some people like to take a back seat and slowly coach the team along. Some people lead from the front, but really this is not necessarily about leadership style. This is about becoming human-centric, understanding that the pace of change is like you've said, the pace of change is absolutely it's like nothing that I've seen within the
Nothing
tech
we've ever
space.
seen. Right.
Nothing we've ever seen before,
Right.
right? So the pace of change is so immense. So I have people reach out to me regularly. They're like, well, you do the AI stuff, so you've been doing this for a few years now. What do you think I should study next? And that's the thing. I've been studying this stuff day in, day out, almost every day for the last 6-7 years, and even I'm behind. So it's not a matter of catching up. But when you've got a period of change so dramatic, as a leader, your responsibility then becomes about, trying to provide some level of certainty in a period of total uncertainty. Now, I'm not, at no point of writing that book was I preaching any certainty of anything. The book is me on the corner preaching doubt more than anything else, saying I don't know what's going to happen, but what I will tell you is what I am seeing, and the patterns are telling me that this is likely. And when you lead through certainty, it's pretty easy. The business has a set of objectives. You have a target. You kind of chaperone the staff to the target one way or another, and you get to the end goal. But when you're living in a period of total uncertainty, where you don't understand the evolution of this technology, you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, you don't know whether there'll be a commercial edict to suddenly start cutting numbers. You're leading through an unprecedented time of change and uncertainty. So most leaders, if they're candid, will admit that they don't know what the next 3 to 6 months holds.
And it's likely to last a long time too, right, Surinder? This is the other thing,
100%.
pacing yourself in the organization through, what is going to be, perpetual for as far as we can see it at this point.
So yeah, exactly. So how do you lead when you don't actually know? So the book is about, the book tries to refocus leaders on letters of the past. Now, I've got a deep love of philosophy and have done for many years. And, I turn to these pages of wisdom from time to time, Roman philosophy, Greek philosophy, Asian philosophy, whatever it might be. There's pearls of wisdom in there everywhere. And a lot of that wisdom, whilst it wasn't created during a period of technological change, what it does do is it refocuses the mind on what we can control. And what we can control is how we respond to things, how we reflect on things, and all of these things are so important because you're going to have to, when you're in this period of chaos and people are asking you, well, what do I do next? And you don't know, you're going to have to find some solace somewhere to provide them direction.
Is that what brought you here, Surinder? Is that what brought you to the concept? Because a lot of the book is really based on this, right? Of these timeless principles, if you will. Mm-hmm. So you must feel that they are becoming or have become even more relevant today, perhaps, than ever before. Yeah,
I think so. I think, look, there is a lot of wisdom in the past. Whilst say Marcus Aurelius, the last Stoic emperor, didn't deal with AI. What they had during that period, he dealt with plagues, he dealt with war, he dealt with seismic human challenges, and navigating those changes, it will need all those skills. And a lot of those skills are around self-reflection, about understanding the impact of your actions. Look, there's a concept I discuss in there, which I'll show you just how relatable these things are. So there's a concept I talk about called paideia, and it's a Greek concept of our responsibility to the next generation to continue the learning of knowledge, right? So we hand over to the next generation, and we're entrusted with the knowledge, and we hand it to the next generation, who then go on, and the circle fulfills itself, right? You continue that forevermore. This is the first time, I think, in the time that I've been working in technology, that we have absolutely severed that trust, because now the next generation of leaders, the juniors and the trainees and the legal researchers, those jobs are vanishing faster than ever. So who will be the next leaders, of the future? Who will be the people who will hold this knowledge and pass it on? And I think we're almost creating a perfect environment for AI to become the next leader. Because if you get to a stage in 20 years' time and there isn't any juniors who have worked their way up the rank and understand the trade, and only AI understands it, who's left to take that job? AI, right?
Well, loss of apprenticeship is quite a concern. It really is, especially to connect the dots to the points that you made earlier in terms of, downsizing in organizations, particularly because of technology productivity, and the absence of entry level jobs for, where people typically, learned the very basics of, of the industry. So this idea of, thinking longer term about what happens when we cut out or lose our apprenticeship level is something that I'm not sure we've quite thought long enough in the, into the future to really understand the impact of what that might.
Me and you, Mimi, wouldn't be here if someone hadn't trained us in something at some point.
Oh my goodness.
So
all of your early careers just
well,
foundational.
exactly. So if now we're hearing a lot of noise saying, "Oh, don't worry about the senior guys will be fine. There'll be plenty of work for the senior guys." Yeah, but that's not the problem. The problem is
They're not going to live forever, so we have.
Well, exactly. As much as I'd love to, maybe that will be the benefit of AI. They'll find a cure for aging. But I don't think I want to pay taxes for eternity, so I'm good.
So let's transition into the heart of the book, Surinder, because you're starting to get there, and I think that it's critical that we understand the points that you're making and the basis of these 4 enduring virtues that become kind of epicenters, if you will, in the book itself. So before I take them individually, can you just explore them collectively for me? What landed you here, and how do you think that they together, create the framework that you're looking to advocate?
So the 4 noble virtues, or the Stoic virtues, a lot of the book is based around Stoic philosophy, and Marcus Aurelius was the last known emperor who not only practiced but evangelized Stoic philosophy. There were many people before that. I talk about Zeno, I talk about a number of Greek philosophers and Roman philosophers who formed this foundational practice. The 4 Stoic practice, the 4 virtues are wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. And throughout the whole book, you'll find that they're woven into the chapters, dedicated chapters, and they are what I consider, whilst Stoicism makes a huge deal about them, they are what I consider absolutely core to being a human being. The wisdom to know just because you can automate something, whether you should or shouldn't. Justice, are you doing the right thing? Does this serve the generations to come? Temperance, just because you have power, should you exercise that power? And courage, because this period, more so than any of the other virtues, is a period of courage for leaders. Because, we could blindly wander into the abyss if we're not giving this any thought. The board says, do it. You say, okay, I'll retain my job, I'm going to do it. And you're just, next thing you know, 10 people have been fired and 10 livelihoods are lost, and you're sitting there, almost wandering into the abyss without any thought given to it. And my challenge to leaders now is that just because you can automate something, should you? And is it the right thing to do in the longer term? Because they also have a responsibility for these future leaders, right? They're not going to, nobody's talking about the future leaders because it's not now. But there will come a period when these future leaders will be needed and we won't have them. And that won't be a good period. They're not bringing me out of retirement, that's for sure.
So let's take each one of these just for a minute. And I have your book in front of me because I think the opening to each one of these sections is really quite good. So So let's start with wisdom, which you describe as knowing when to trust machines and when to override them. So, from your perspective, how is intelligence not wisdom?
How is intelligence not wisdom? That's a good question. So, um, I mean, we could go into hours of philosophical debate about what intelligence is. um, I think wisdom comes from a deeper place, right? And I'm sure there'll be people ready to debate this, but at a very top level, a generalization level, if you assume that intelligence is applying a level of logic, right, to a situation. If we do this, then that happens. If that happens, then that happens. And then, there's an outcome, right? There's a logical progression. Wisdom comes from a deeper place, right? These four cardinal virtues is these decisions are more about reflection about the human condition than they are about the logic, right? So, I'll give you an example. So, intelligence versus logic here at a very top level. So, intelligence, the boss, the board says we need to reduce X amount of money in X department, we need to automate as much as possible. Intelligence on multiple levels will be, yeah, we can do that, we should do that, and this is how we'll do it, and these people will be fired, and there is a process and a logical progression to the end goal, right? Which will be to these people to go and the money to be saved. Wisdom, like the four other cardinal virtues, will be a period of reflection about the impact of that decision, right? So just because we can do it, is it the right thing to do? What are the other impacts that this will create? So that reflection is not something that happens in transactional management because it's all about business. How do we get to this end objective? How do we get to this end objective? And there's a good chunk of that book which is dedicated to reflection practices, to stop for a moment and say, is that the right thing to do, right? Despite the commercial pressures, does this mean that we don't have a future set of people to hand this to? Does this mean we're breaking the longer term trust of the business? Is it that we could end up in a situation where we displace all these knowledge workers, lose all of this knowledge, and end up in a situation where we're losing, all the great aspects of human nature, which are, our non-binary nature, our ability to see the grays, our ability to read the room, we're social animals. We see and hear so much. We don't work in a binary way. So wisdom is when you can make a very wise and intelligent decision at the same time, but that wisdom bit is often missed out because that requires reflection.
Well, it seems to me that, that the connection to and everything that you're saying, certainly from a leader of business perspective or a leader in any real context, is wisdom, to draw on for the good judgment that's going to need to be applied here and now, because that's really what you mean, right? Is wisdom is an outcome goes to judgment, I think, and and how to make those types of difficult decisions. Play a short game, play a long game. How do you balance that, et cetera, et cetera? It's the judgment we need.
It's really asking people to think about. We've become so used to being transactional in nature, right? The pressures of working life and the constant change and do this and let's get that done. And, it's an ever increasingly competitive world. And the driver is normally get stuff done, right? This book challenges people because it asks them to stop for a minute and reflect on the decisions they're making and whether they serve the long-term interests of our responsibilities as leaders, right? So not many people have the bandwidth to reflect. And there's not a lot of self-reflection that goes on nowadays. You don't have many leaders. And this is why I think the book is different from most things that you'll read in this space, because they're quite transactional in nature. Do this, then do that. Do this, and then do that. How to do this in 10 minutes sort of thing. I'm saying, look, stop for a moment. Stop and think about what you're doing and how does this impact. So there's a chapter in the book where I talk about, periods of impact, right? So you can have the immediate impact of firing 10 people. What does that mean in 5 years? What does that mean in 10 years? What does that mean in 50 years? The impact of your decision is rarely short-term impact. This stuff, when it comes to humans, can carry on for a long time. And look, the reality of the future is that we will be looked upon as the generation that was the most impactful on this technology, because we are the people in the driving seat at the moment. Now, let's assume for argument's sake that this is, as I believe, the most consequential period since the Industrial Revolution, right? If that's the case, and we are the people in the driving seat, if we're not making decisions which are in the interests of human beings, we will be remembered for that, and not in a favorable way, I don't think.
I feel like what you're describing, then I want to move us to courage, but I feel like what you're describing too is this idea of leading on multiple timescales. Can I use that language?
Yep.
Leading
Yep.
on multiple timescales, right? So it's recognizing this, fast and slow idea. We've heard it before, but I think it's really true. So how do we as leaders, manage to the timescales of machines, in order to leverage the learning ideas from machines, because that's what it is, creating these tremendous fast learning so that our decisions are better informed, et cetera. But then how do we also manage on human timescales? And if we thought that we had both of those assets, to really play with, if you will, in terms of our leadership approach, we could see this value of offsetting
100%.
one with the other, right? Which I think is some of the things that
100%.
you're describing.
Look, what I'm not advocating for is a ban of AI or to hold back. I think if I was to be totally honest, 50% of me is incredibly excited by the technology and its trajectory as a lifelong technologist, but 50% of me is terrified about the longer term impacts on the environment, the longer term impacts on human beings, on employment. Now, if you look at the pros, right? So you look at Google DeepMind's AlphaFold. I think it was Google DeepMind AlphaFold database. Now, if I give you an example of how huge the achievements of Gen AI have been in such a short period, if you imagine that if I took a picture of my road where I live, of every house on that road today, right? And then in a year's time had a picture of every house on every road on the entire planet in 1 year, that's effectively what AlphaFold achieved. And AlphaFold basically solved an age-old problem of protein mapping, right? So the human body is made up of proteins, and scientists have said for many, many years that this is an endeavor that will take many decades, right? AI turns up within 1 year, they've got an entire protein database, which is now open to anyone who wants to use it. So if you go to AlphaFold, any scientist, any medical professional can utilize their database to start making cures and looking at, questions that have puzzled scientists and doctors for many years. And when you look at it and from that perspective, you think, wow, could we get to a stage in years to come where you've almost got custom treatment based on your DNA profile? It's not beyond the realms of possibility, right? So now the other side of it is it's undeniable that this is having an impact on human labor. It's undeniable, right? So there are reports coming out every day. In the beginning, the kind of feedback I was getting is, look, they're just masking other reasons to fire people under the guise of AI. I don't doubt that's happening at all, and that's not something new. But we would be amiss if we didn't look at the fact that this is happening at the tech giants, and they are saying it very clearly. Meta said it, and a number of the other giants very clearly in public statements. We are responsible for making sure that we deliver value for shareholders, and we believe that AI can do these jobs. It doesn't get clearer than that. They're not saying it's something else.
So, you're saying, just to mirror this back, if I'm hearing you right. So you're saying, look, it's not that the potential here, for tremendous progress isn't a possibility and exciting to, I think, to all of us. To your point, it seems that what we shouldn't have to feel is that optimism, needs to somehow, become a pessimistic idea in order to elevate, our concerns for the impact, on stakeholders and other, aspects of society that will clearly be dramatically affected by this. So if we can think about those two things at the same time
right.
and try to make good decisions, right? Try to make good trade-off
And that's
decisions.
what it is.
I think that's what it is. Hold back when we don't know enough about the impacts, and the impacts can be terribly detrimental to whatever environment, people, progress, equity, whatever the concept is. So if we can just make 360 decisions as best as possible, and I think this is what you mean. These virtues create a way for us to, to think
to
more
reflect
broadly,
that's right.
reflect more carefully, right, about the decisions that we're making. And as I said earlier, the long tail that's likely associated with many of them. It's a hard thing to do.
It's a hard thing to do. And the thing is, look, I've had the privilege of managing people in every job that I've worked in for 25 years. So I've learned a little bit about human beings. And one thing I can tell you is that nobody teaches you this reflection, right? I've not been taught at any stage in any part of my jobs what it means to be a leader, right? You're just given a load of people and you say, good luck, figure it out, right? So some companies offer more structured training, but I've never seen in my 25 years anything related to even reflection. Forget Stoic practices, but reflection about the human condition, because we seem to have forgotten, we've taken it for granted that we are working with human beings, and humans. You look at Maslow's theory of hierarchical needs. You have to understand that, we are the thing that keeps these systems going. We are motivated. We have the need for shelter, the need for food. We have a number of things that we need to be, to reach some level of self-actualization. But the thing is, none of this stuff is taught in leadership lessons, unless you've studied like a master's in, organizational leadership. So you're basically given a load of people and said, good luck. And now those very same managers are being lumbered with an environment that's changing at a pace that they barely comprehend. And human resources going to them and saying, what should I do next? So the book, when I started writing the book, it actually came from a set of questions related to exactly that. I had no intention of writing a book at that stage. But I had, two incidents happened within the same week where I thought, what is going on? So the first one was I had a colleague from work who took me aside and said, do you mind if I, ask you some questions? I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. And this is not the sort, very experienced engineer, not the sort of person who has just a regular discussion to pick your brains unless something's badly wrong. So I'm sitting there fully expecting a resignation. And his question to me was, do you think AI is going to take my job? And this is going back a few years now. And I looked at him and laughed, because I thought, look, at that stage, ChatGPT was being used for making funny images and writing CVs and things. It wasn't consequential in the way it is now. And I effectively laughed it off and said, stop worrying. Nothing's happening anytime soon, right? You'll be fine. And I said, see it as an augmentation technology, because that's all I could see at that point. I wasn't looking, 3 to 6 months of evolution forward, 3 to 6 years of evolution forward. And then I had, one of my friends who's got kids at university who were studying, whatever they were studying at the time. And he said, do you think that they're going to have a job when they come out? I was like, why are these people asking me these questions? And this was going back a number of years. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually this has the potential to have a very sizable consequential impact for human beings. And then I went on a deep research spree. 2 years ago, there was considerably less research than there is now. But I kept writing until the very last minute. So I have incorporated, stuff more recent. But I covered the human condition. I covered stress within AI. I covered, 50 plus case studies, 1,400 references. I went from never writing a book, I went to the other extreme, which was I'm going to research the daylights out of this subject and understand, is there something to it? And the conclusion I came to by the end of the book was that we have a lot to worry about and a lot to think about. And if we don't start doing it soon, it will be too late.
Why did you, at the time, with all of the, I'm sure competing ideas for, your focus of the virtues that you elevated, what were you thinking when you brought justice up to the top?
So I think, look, I think the justice element plays a really huge part in, because, look, our responsibility is as leaders is not just to blindly follow corporate objectives and, just fulfill them. We have a larger responsibility than that, which is justice to our employee base, justice to our direct reports, justice to society as a whole. We know that, and that balance is so important. We have to achieve an equilibrium for society to progress, right? And it doesn't fall on any one person. I can't solely create equilibrium in the world as much as I'd love to. So it requires on every one of the leaders of this period to have justice in mind. Are we doing the right thing? Are we serving the whole of society? Does this impact humans more than help humans? But these are questions we're not used to asking. You're looking at almost sitting with a coffee and having a philosophical discussion with yourself and reflecting and saying, is it the right thing to do? Does this serve justice? Are we doing the right thing? Will we be judged for it in the future? We're not used to asking those questions. We just do. We're very transactional in nature.
I think that it weaves nicely into really my favorite subchapter of the book, which was your temperance with infinite power, and the way that you described it, which is a bit of what we're talking about here. The question isn't whether we can build it. The question is whether the world
whether we should. Yeah, that's right. And look, it's an alien concept to a lot of people I've spoken to, and certainly the feedback I've had on the book. Fortunately, most of which is positive. The one section that I get quizzed about a lot is temperance, saying, "Well, are you advocating for us to slow down and not do something that would be, a commercial advantage?" And I said, I'm not saying that at all, but what I'm saying to you is that you need to reflect about your broader responsibilities, right? So, if tomorrow they come up with a system which companies will implement and suddenly it will save them amount of money, the economic drivers for that will be immense. Companies will be jumping on it all over the place. Now, I'm at the other side of the spectrum where I'm saying, yeah, that's a good thing, but what about the rest of your responsibilities to the human beings that you employ, to society as a whole, to the future generations? And we're not used to that. We're used to transactional. If we can do it, we should do it.
Yeah. Just listen to the question that you got, right? Should we stop what we're doing? To me, that's a transactional question. I think that what temperance is really trying to advocate is more of what I would think of as restraint. If we could have restraint as an operating discipline, if you will.
But it's an alien concept. It's an alien concept to businesses. Right. You saying we should encourage leaders to be temperate, and temperance should be at top of mind when we're making strategic decisions. They're not interested in temperance. They're interested in achieving commercial objectives. So look, I think on the point of temperance, one of the most important things I'll say is, in the book I refer to 2 letters. And those were letters written by leaders within the AI space, Jeffrey Hinton, many, many leaders, people who are effectively the founders of this whole space. And they themselves caution, right, that if we continue on this trajectory, it could lead to an extinction level event. Look, if you saw that a technology was likely to lead to an extinction level event or have long-term detrimental impacts to our species, that someone somewhere would stop, right? They would apply some temperance to that situation. But there has been no temperance applied. So the technology companies are seeing that there is an immense amount of money to be made here, and they have thrown off all regard for temperance and the Stoic virtues. So what I've said is, well, fine, if we accept that the tech leaders of this generation have decided that they're happy with the position that they're going to pursue this regardless of cost, it falls to us as the tier down from that, the leaders of this generation, to start exercising our own judgment and saying, let's not do it just because we can do it. And it's easier said than done, because look, I can't imagine there's many people welcome to a board level where they're going in saying, we can achieve this with this technology, but we think it will be detrimental to the longer term impacts of the company. And, there will be many people who will shy away from those difficult conversations. But, I encourage people still to say it, because maybe it will make the decision makers reflect on what they're doing. But on the other side, they will be fulfilling their obligation to broader society by asking those questions and not making it an alien concept.
So, Surinder, I imagine, and let me just show the book for people that might not be familiar with it. It's really wonderful. I highly recommend. Surinder, you've been out on your book tour talking to a lot of organizations, thought leadership groups, different forums. I think, certainly around Europe, I know for sure, if not beyond. So what are you hearing from leaders and organizations, in terms of their response to this? Where is it resonating as something that, they could stop and consider in terms of what you're advocating here? And, why do you find that some folks might be more inclined to hear the message than perhaps others?
I think some of you're right. I have been on a book tour. I've done 6 or 7 countries and numerous podcasts. I've been around. Because it's less so about me becoming a millionaire from the book, which would be nice, but it's not on my objectives. What I want to do is stir people's thought in this space. Now, fortunately for me, as a first-time writer, it could have gone either way. It could have been totally just me buying it or my mum. It could have gone that way, but I was fully prepared for that. I think one of your guests before, Michael Carroll, I think you've had on here before.
Yeah, good
he said that his words were, "This book is a masterpiece," and I'll take that from someone of his standing.
Absolutely.
But it is very different from anything that's been written in this space, because it is a book at its heart about ethics. I was asked a question on the book tour, what would be my ultimate dream for this book? I said, my dream would be for it to be banned by governments as a basically ethical propaganda and burnt in the streets. And effectively it would mean everyone would have to buy a copy to burn it. So I can work with that. I think the general consensus has been it's been really well received. It's definitely different from anything in its class. I don't know any other book in this space that looks at ancient philosophy to start looking at our modern challenges. The feedback that I've had, and look, I was fortunate that I got to get maybe 40 contributors at sea level for my network to contribute to the book with their thoughts. So it wasn't unchallenged throughout its production, because I was new to it. I was like, well, I'm not going to write a blind book and hope for the best. I want people to challenge it throughout its development. And most of the most recent feedback has been something I've experienced myself and many of my immediate peers, is that the pace of adoption, companies have absolutely lost control of governance when it comes to AI in many cases. And when we have their public faces that, no, we've got full control, you can't use it unless it's corporately approved. The reality is everybody's using everything and anything they want, and governance has gone largely out of the window. So when I'm talking about what they see as a luxury, right, reflection, I think is absolutely core to effective leadership. But it's largely been seen over the years as a luxury for you to be able to sit down and reflect on what's happening, because there's not enough bandwidth. I get that argument. The reality is, modern leaders are so drowning under work, and with the acceleration of AI, this is just, adding a whole additional layer of complexity to their day-to-day work. Reflection takes time, and I knew that would happen. So what I've tried to do is build in practices within the book and in the appendices, which teach people how to, within very short periods, right? 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, how to improve your reflection practices until it becomes second nature. So you're no longer having to look at my book and say, oh, what do I do for, wisdom or practicing temperance? It becomes part of your daily routine where you sit down at the end of the day for 5-10 minutes and reflect about the decisions you've made about during the day and ask yourself, is there any decision I made today where I didn't exercise the 4 Stoic virtues? It gets you to start thinking. And this is like muscle memory. The more you practice Stoic practice, the better you get at it. And it becomes second nature.
I will say, for folks that, again, aren't familiar with the book, the 3rd chapter of the book, the ending section of the book, is just chock full of not only, case studies, but toolkits and frameworks and, very application centric, tools and guidelines that make a lot of the ideas very, very practical. So that was a great way to end the book, Surinder. I think that instead of swinging it up higher, you kind of brought it down and put it on the ground. And I think that was that was effective. Probably left people with some of the tools and techniques that would help implement. And if I had to say, this concept of reflection that you brought up at the beginning of the discussion and you ended with, it makes me feel, I thought, having read the book, that perhaps this was the impactful outcome that you might have hoped for the most here, that if we could affect leaders in their points of view and perspectives on the practice of reflection, as an organizational capability, that seemed a bit of a theme here. Fair enough?
I would love that. I would love if philosophical practice became part and parcel of leadership training. And I think that the training that I built into the book was for one reason, is because philosophical thinking and philosophy is often seen as highbrow, and there is a literary class that reflects on this stuff. It's not. It's for every person. It's for every leader. And what I've tried to do is put it in practical terms, saying, look, it's not beyond I wasn't taught the classics at school. I learned them, and I think they should be accessible, and can offer immense value, not just in work, but in just day-to-day life, especially in the modern busy period that we live in.
Human essential, right? Just a human foundation. Surinder, you're great. Thank you so much. Thanks for writing the book. Thanks for coming on.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting.
I did get your name from Mike Carroll, so just so you know, to connect the dots to a friend and somebody who advocates for good thinking. He advocates for good thinking in the space. Yeah, he's a great guy. So I hope you'll come back again. I know that you're busy, writing another book, which I think has nothing to do with this topic or this type of reader.
It has slightly. So I'm writing a children's series of STEM books, but they're based on AI. So it's helping 10-year-olds understand the relationship, how computers think differently from us.
There you go.
So
good for you. Well, you'll keep us posted. Come back and let me know how you're doing. I'd love to hear you more at the end of your tour, maybe 6 months from now or so.
Sure.
And
I'd love that.
See what you learned. Yeah, that'd be great. Surinder, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.